Hello everyone, and welcome to Gleed's first market report webinar. We're delighted to welcome you all here today, and for those of you that don't know us that well, Gleeds are the UK's foremost independent international property and construction consultancy with over 130 years experience, 1,900 dedicated staff operating across 6 continents in 71 offices. Now, today we've got over 700 of you who've asked to join the webinar, so great numbers, and we're really looking forward to helping you today. This is the first of a series of webinars aimed at helping you gain an insight and analysis around the market, which, as we all know, is going through momentous changes at the moment. Now, my name's Julian Barlow, and I'm your moderator for this webinar, and I've spent the past 35 years or so in and around our industry, 17 of which have been with Gleeds. Over the past few months, our insights and analytics team have been gathering valuable data and capturing views from across the industry through our market surveys to understand and respond to the current challenges and opportunities that the industry faces. So I think first, a big thanks to everybody that responded, as it helped us gain an understanding of what's going on out there, and also has allowed us to produce this webinar today and the report that follows it. Now, knowledge is power, as they say, and today our webinar will cover all things from the highs and lows of the industry, the collision of Brexit, COVID-19 and 2021 forecasts. As you can see from this slide, joining you today will be our insights and analytics team. That's James Garner and Nicola Herring. They're the people who are the brains behind this webinar and have produced the report, which you'll all get following this webinar via email. Also joining us today are Dave Corbin, who's Head of Project Management in the UK, and Sarah Boonham, our Head of Cost Management in the UK. And both of those will be answering questions at the end of the webinar and also providing a little commentary as we go along. Now, I know we're approaching the end of the day. Blood sugar levels are dipping, and it's easy for people's attention spans to wander. Well, first thing is, we don't intend to detain you for that long. This should be around about 45 minutes. This whole webinar presentation will run for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be a Q&A afterwards. And we also have some polls during the event, and please feel free to participate. These do 2 things. One, they provide very interesting on-the-spot analysis. Secondly, it ensures you're all awake out there, and so very useful 2 uses. Everybody gets a report, as I say, at the end. And so without further ado, I'll now hand over to James to kick off the webinar. James, it's all yours.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you to everyone for joining our webinar this afternoon. As Julian said, this will be the first of many. Before I dive into the webinar, I'll just give you a quick overview of the things we're going to discuss. We're going to look at an economic overview and then look at the impacts of COVID-19 on site productivity and how that's changed throughout the year. We're then going to do a quick update on Brexit and how the deal affects us, a look at contracts and claims and adversity in the industry. And at that point, I'll hand over to my colleague Nicola, who'll take you through threats to the construction industry and then our view on the 2021 inflation and beyond. And before we wrap up, we'll do a quick analysis of some of the sectors, the key sectors, both up booming and other sectors in the industry. And then we'll sum up before we go to questions and answers. So as Julian says, there will be a few polls, which I'll signpost along the way. And also, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function across the top, and we'll try and get to as many as we can throughout the Q&A session. But if we don't get to all of them, don't worry, we will get back to you, either as part of the email that issues the report with the most frequently asked questions or individually. In terms of the methodology of the survey, we had a great response to our initial market survey. Around 170 of you responded, and I'm sure a lot of you are on this call at the moment. And that was a wide range of people throughout the industry, from clients, contractors and consultants. And it's given us a really interesting insight and some quite surprising views, as we'll see. So before we kick off, poll number 1, which should be coming up on your screen around now, we'd just like to know what kind of audience we've got. So if you could tell us what type of organisation you're part of, whether you're a contractor, client, consultant, it's just useful so that we can ensure that we're picking the right questions when we get to the Q&A session. So I'll give you a few seconds just to fill that in. Okay. Hopefully everyone's done. That's brilliant. Okay, so interesting. Over half of you are consultants. We got about 20% of contractors, and 10% or so of clients, and then the rest developers, landowners, occupiers, and others make up the rest. So that's a really good mix. So thank you very much, everyone, for helping us with that. So let's kick off with the actual webinar then. Let's start with an economic overview. So I think it's fair to say there is still significant uncertainty in the economy and in our industry. And that's because there's many factors at play, often pulling in different directions. And this makes it harder than ever to make predictions, although you'll see there are some obvious trends emerging. So construction output reduced by 40.7% in April 2020, just after the pandemic kicked off. And that was following the first lockdown. But actually, it recovered throughout the course of the year. And by November 2020, the ONS was reporting that construction output was back near pre-pandemic levels, which was very encouraging. GDP fell by 8.9% in the year to November 2020. And that includes a 2.6% fall in November, which was due to the varying degrees of COVID-19 restrictions, which were put in place across all 4 nations. But this was actually after 6 months of consecutive increases from spring 2020. So what we see there is it's not a straight line. It was a bumpy road, and we certainly saw the effects of the government restrictions had on that growth or decline. In terms of employment, also a varied picture. Unemployment is estimated to have increased by 1.2% in the year, which seems fairly modest given the scale of the issue we're all facing. But in the 3 months to November 2020, the redundancy rate reached a record 14.2 per thousand, which is probably due to the threat of the original furlough scheme ending. Obviously, this is now extended to the end of April 2021, and it's probably not until the end of the furlough scheme that we will see the full effect on unemployment. So it's fair to say that some of the employment figures at the moment need to be taken with a little pinch of salt. However, on an encouraging note, the construction was one of only 2 sectors to see an increase in year-on-year vacancies in the last quarter of 2020. In terms of Brexit, which we'll go into a bit more detail later, I think the major takeaway is we have a deal. It may not be the deal that everyone wanted, but as we all know, our industry and the economy in large thrive on certainty. So we have some certainty. And then in terms of the vaccine, yes, it's going to take a while to roll out, and it probably means that we won't see the full effect until the second half of the year, but it is certainly light at the end of the tunnel. But I think, again, the economic overview, it's varied. I think it's fair to say that we're going to have a difficult, rocky 6 months ahead, and then hopefully things will start improving greatly in the year after the summer. So moving on to poll number 2 then, what we'd really like to know is whether you've seen an upturn in activity since the beginning of the year. And whilst you're answering that, I'll just give you a little bit of the feedback we got on the survey. Around 23% of contractors and 27% of non-contractors thought that tender opportunities will increase in the first quarter of the new year. But it'll be interesting to see how that changes to your responses, because we're actually hearing from several sources that there appears to be a bit of a shift, with many new project inquiries coming in since the beginning of January. So I'll give you all a few seconds just to answer that, and we'll see how that compares. That is interesting. So actually, we've got 61% of you saying that you've seen an upturn in activity, which is different to the where we had before Christmas, where it was about 23, somewhere around 23 to 27%. And this ties in with the feedback we've been getting from the industry since January, and it certainly shows how quickly things can change. So thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. Okay, moving on to COVID-19 and the impacts on site productivity. So what you see here from our survey is the vast majority of contractors are saying that site productivity is between 81 and 100%. And that shows that the COVID secure measures are working. There is a difference there, you'll notice the dark bar is contractors and the light bar is non-contractors. There's a difference there, which is interesting. But I think it is driving the use of modern methods of construction, in particular off-site components, although modular and panelized systems are important too. The thing with off-site components is they're probably the easiest to implement. And we shouldn't forget about these new strains of coronavirus, which even though we're getting to these levels of productivity, that we are hearing that there are some cases of whole teams or whole sites having to shut down when the virus takes hold, because we've all heard that it's a lot more transmittable. So again, it's a mixed picture. Once we've got everyone on site, I think contractors really have done a great job in working out how to get their productivity up to near 100%. But one thing to note here is that we're not at 100%. So there is inevitably going to be an impact on program, whether that's 10 or 20%. And we all need to consider that when we're looking at programs and prelims, and make sure that's translated to project costs and budgets. But I think the takeaway from this slide is that we've shown ourselves to be a very resilient industry. So apart from the first couple of weeks when COVID first started, we've pretty much been one of the only industries that have carried on regardless. And you know, I think that's testament to a lot of the great work that goes on and how well we can adapt when we need to. So moving on to Brexit then. So as I said, we have a deal. It may not be the deal that everyone wanted, but it's a deal and we've got certainty. There is still a concern due to the challenges with importing materials and also labour shortages. And there is knock-on impact from other industries. So, you know, border delays and all things are compounded by COVID, of course. So there are pressures on deliveries. There's lack of empty containers in China driving up prices. There's port delays, mainly in Felixstowe, causing carriers to favour European ports. And then deliveries need to be trucked over. And that's all adding time and cost and adding pressure. So I'd say that the whole just-in-time methodology is certainly impacted. And teams and contractors do need to plan ahead more. And these results show that. It shows that 82% of contractors have contingency plans for the effect of Brexit, whether it was before or after. I think it's the same issue in that they're looking at greater use of modern methods of construction, with 59% saying that, 68% saying use of alternative products and materials, and 73% saying pre-ordering or storage of materials. What you'll note about this is all about pre-planning. So what we're all going to have to do is get used to thinking about things a bit more in advance, and we've shown ourselves to be very good at that. On the right-hand side, you'll see which packages do contractors see as the biggest risk with the Brexit deal. And there's some key packages there. If you take 83% for facade and 71% for M&E and 58% of respondents saying dry lining, you get a feel for where the issues are. And if you took on some big projects, particularly in London, if you took facade and M&E services, that could easily be over 50% of the project cost. So you really have to consider what's making up the elements of your project and how Brexit is going to affect it. Okay, I'm going to move over now to contracts and claims. So what was interesting, when we did our first report after COVID, nearly 3/4 of respondents said that they thought there was going to be a more adversarial approach. But actually what's happened since then is on our last report, it went down to 41%. And on this report, it's fairly consistent at 44%. So the industry is continuing to be less adversarial than originally thought. Now, that may be because projects haven't come to their natural conclusion and there may be disputes being stored up, but it'd be nice to think that actually, I think we've all learned to work very collaboratively and understood that there's huge commercial pressures on both contractors and clients. And when we're considering contract amendments, it's considering the fair risk of an allocation and being proactive with contract amendments, because 92% of contractors are looking for amendments related to COVID and 86% in relation to Brexit. So we can't ignore that. And I think on the whole, clients have been very receptive to finding a mutual way forward to share the allocation of risk reasonably. Okay, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Nicola now to take you through threats to the construction industry.
Thanks, James. We asked respondents to rank the threats to the construction industry as part of our survey. The survey responses came in December and January, so it's really interesting to analyse the responses as events unfolded. And you'll probably remember that it was a bit of a roller coaster. You can see on the timeline the positive and negative events. So we're starting with the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine approval in early December. And the first jab of this was given on the 8th of December, which gave hope to an end to the pandemic. On the 11th of December, the UK and EU both advised that no deal Brexit was the most likely outcome and preparations should be made for such. The new, more infectious strain of COVID was notified on the 18th of December, and this caused great concern and changed many people's Christmas plans. The EU and UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement was announced on the 24th of December, and all 4 nations went into lockdown sometime between 20th of December and the 6th of January. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was approved late December and rollout started from early January. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the way contractors responded between the months. Brexit became more of a concern in December, with 62% indicating no deal Brexit and Brexit-related issues as the top threat to the construction industry. This was up from 14% in our autumn survey. However, by January, only 24% voted Brexit-related issues as the top threat, with further waves of COVID-19 and lockdowns becoming more of a worry. This pattern was also indicated in inflation forecasts from survey respondents, and these generally became more conservative in January. Whilst we are forecasting modest positive inflation in 2021, the year is very much expected to be a tale of 2 halves. A slow and flat first half is anticipated due to ongoing COVID-19 restrictions and a smaller pool of projects. The second half sees inflation picking up with the emergence of larger projects for which there is a smaller suitable contractor base, and with labour and materials cost pressures being felt. In addition to materials cost pressures as a result of Brexit, steel prices have recently surged as a result of global demand. It is hoped that the government's promise to build is followed through, and the first new schools by the Department for Education are expected to start on site in September, and large infrastructure programmes are progressing, such as High Speed 2 and Sizewell C. From the survey results, we notice more positive forecasts from those who worked in the public sector. It is also envisaged that other sectors will pick up in activity in the latter half of 2021. It is expected that the vaccine will lead to reduced social distancing measures, and there will be pent-up demand when people are able to socialise again. This will help the wider economy and give confidence to the market. This is further supported by the results of our recent LinkedIn poll, with 73% of respondents saying that the vaccine rollout will give clients the confidence to push ahead with projects. So moving on to our inflation forecasts. On the left-hand side, you can see the regional forecast for 2021, and these are between 0.75% and 1.5% depending on region. For 2022, it is hoped and expected that the market will have recovered somewhat, with a return to more typical inflation levels between 2 to 3% and then 2.5 to 3.75% in 2023, depending on region. We haven't gone into detail of each and every region here due to webinar time constraints, but our report includes inflation forecasts for each region, as well as an update on regional activity and trends. So moving on to another poll, we'd like to know which sectors you think will be most positively affected by market conditions in 2021. It'll be really interesting to see what you think on this. There's obviously some opportunities arising from the pandemic and the changes to the way we live and work, but healthcare has been centre stage in 2020, so that was likely to continue in 2021. So I think healthcare and infrastructure are sort of key results there, and that aligns with what our survey respondents said. So healthcare, public sector and infrastructure were the top 3 sectors identified for growth as part of our survey. And you can see the percentages of respondents that selected those beneath the headings. The current focus in the healthcare and public sector is on frontline delivery related to COVID-19, but there are also large pipelines of work, such as the Health Infrastructure Plan, which is a programme with a budget of £18 billion involving 40 hospitals and project delivery timescales between 2020 and 2030. There's also a large amount of infrastructure investment planned. It is anticipated that some projects will continue to be accelerated to help boost economic recovery and also to help level up the economy. I will now pass on to Sarah for the next poll and discussion on the sectors that have been negatively impacted the most by market conditions.
Thanks very much, Nicola, and good afternoon to everyone. So, as Nicola says, I would like to invite you to participate in the final poll of the day. So please apply your minds to which sectors will be most detrimentally affected by the market and click away. The results from our survey, interestingly enough, were slightly different to what we've got there. Aviation was roundabout spot on, 60-odd%. Our survey results said that market was massively going to be impacted, which we know. And then in addition to that, as you can see here, we split out commercial into commercial and retail. So obviously, as we are aware, our urban centres, i.e. our towns and city centres, have been massively impacted by the pandemic and other forces, market forces that were affected prior to the pandemic too. So it's unsurprising to me that both the retail and the commercial sectors, which have traditionally dominated our towns and city centres, have been highlighted by survey respondents and your good selves as the sectors which would be negatively impacted by the market and hence must adapt to survive. Turning to retail, clearly we all appreciate, we've read the headlines for the retail sector. 2020 was an annus horribilis, with stores opening and closing at the drop of a hat, responding to the pandemic. We've got 15,000 stores closing their shutters for the final time, and an associated 175,000 plus job losses, which is just tragic. And setting that against a backdrop of existing challenges prior to the pandemic for the sector, being relevance of stores, the threat by online retailing, and also increased business costs, including concerns around business rates. So all in all, non-food retailers had an absolute nightmare year in 2020. And unfortunately, the leisure sector didn't fare much better, with many of the food and beverage outlets closed for the vast majority of the year. And those in the hospitality business are now noting that they've got insufficient cash reserves to survive post-March without further government support. And similarly, a 70% decline in box office sales last year gave the worst year for cinemas since records began. So really, in the retail sector, we're seeing a sector subdivided, as food and essential retail are thriving. And indeed, the majority of food retailers and essential retailers thankfully returned their COVID business rate relief at the back end of last year, after a little bit of persuasion, once it was recognised that the subsidy was simply topping up dividends. However, a brighter outlook is thankfully predicted for the sector as a whole in the second half of 2021, with sales growth of 3% forecast. And we're all looking forward to that bounce back of fashion based on pent-up savings and demand, and a more confident consumer emerging given the vaccine rollout. Local and neighbourhood shopping will be even more prevalent in 2021, which we all embrace. And sustainability and experiential shopping will re-emerge as dominant trends. And unsurprisingly, following a year of minimal social contact, consumers are expected to gravitate back to stores and restaurants en masse. So for the commercial sector, for our workplace, the work from home revolution has caused a huge mental shift and an acknowledgement that remote working is both possible and productive, which will inevitably cause a radical restructuring of property portfolios, with 88% of workers now expecting to work from home 2 days a week going forward as a minimum. But the physical office will always be vital for the purpose of coming together, for ideas generation, relationship building and deal making. We all know that creativity happens when people get together. Maybe Vodafone is the latest example of an organisation trialling the future ready office, defined by flexibility, productivity and creativity rather than simply location. with new IT capabilities, harnessing that 40% of colleagues' time spent working together as teams. So as a sector, the commercial office in new flexible formats will always be required. And we're already seeing that sector bounce back here at Gleeds with an absolute emphasis on well-being. So as those retail and commercial requirements flex, so does the composition of our towns and city centres as they seek to recover, adapt and evolve. I personally see 2021 as the year of the reset for our urban centres, with the need to encompass a wider variety of uses and truly act as the beating heart of the communities. So I'm quite excited. We have an unprecedented and large-scale opportunity to build back better and transform our high streets and urban centres into those vibrant hubs that we yearn for future generations. However, to support that, Boris's billions will be needed through the Future High Street Fund, Towns Funds, and hopefully other emerging funds to support both local authorities and private sector partners as they all come together to deliver our new destinations and create these urban transitions. As simply the private sector delivery model, I'm afraid, is no longer fit for purpose, but there is a big opportunity there for all of us to be involved in something very, very exciting. I'll hand back to James to sum up.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. So I think just quickly to round up then, I think our industry has shown great resilience, and the key words are really flexibility, adaptation, collaboration and innovation. Our industry is clearly better at some things than others, but we have to keep moving on the innovation track. So modern methods of construction, digitalisation are absolutely crucial to comply with the key principles of the recently published construction playbook. So that sums up our presentation. We really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll now pass you back to Julian.
Thanks very much, James. You might want to put your camera on, James, when you come back. That's great, you're there. Thank you. Okay, so now the interesting bit of the webinar, which is the bit we've not rehearsed, which is questions. And here's where Sarah and Dave come into their own. So Dave, if you can join us with your camera in your, that's it, lovely job. So the first question is from Seb from Lang O'Rourke, and not surprisingly, it's looking at costs. And so this is one for you, Sarah. There's so much uncertainty in our sector at the moment, and we had a report, I think only today, looking at materials shortages, etc., which might well push up prices. What's your view on how you see costs being impacted by inflationary pressures?
Goodness, yes. Rather the big question and the one that everybody's asking, and I need the crystal ball to answer, but I'll give it a go. I guess we go back to the basic rules of sort of supply and demand. We know that the pool of contractors and supply chain partners isn't what it used to be. There's been some decline over a period, and obviously there's been some pandemic casualties too. And there's also reduced estimating capacity. So that's the supply part of supply and demand. I guess, on the demand side, construction output has been growing steadily again since we saw that massive decline in April last year when everything fell off a cliff. So we're now at a point where the output is at the highest level since January 20. Which is good news for us all. Now that's obviously going to be supported by the public sector programs that we read about and the massive spending and that commitment to build that Nicola talked about previously. There's also the factor of confidence, which leads to demand. So the Brexit trade deal has given us some renewed confidence, and the vaccine rollout too. And so we're hoping that investors who were sitting on the sidelines in 2020 deciding whether to get the cash out of the piggy bank or not, and schemes that were delayed will start to be released. So everything's starting to move again. Your answers today showed us that you're getting more inquiries through. If consultants are getting the inquiries through, that will lead to through flow for the contractors probably towards the second half of this year. So higher demand with strains around the supply chain starts to give people the reason to be able to inflate their prices. We also need to consider, I guess, the input prices, as I would call them, so labour and materials. Now, we all know that we've had a shortage of skilled labour in our industry for some time. Bricklayers is always cited as the key example, and coupled with that, as Nicola's already highlighted, 7% of our workforce in the UK are EU nationals, and so the end of any free movement could give us further problems there. We're trying to train the apprentices, and also smarter ways of doing things. Modern methods of construction will hopefully negate the effect of labour issues there. But we can't hide from the fact that material prices continue to rise. Steel is the latest. Just looking at that, steel's gone from 500 to 700 pound a tonne now in the space of a year. Now, that's the highest rise, but we're seeing gradual rises for timber and other materials. So I think when we take all of that into account, if demand is rising and material prices are starting to rise, hopefully labour can get a bit more productive with a bit of imagination and using these new tools, such as modern methods of construction. And that's really what's lending us to say, we're not at the point yet that we're saying that prices are actually rising. They're static for the first half of this year.
Okay, Sarah, we've got quite a few questions. If you could wind up on that one quickly for me.
Yeah, so static for the first half of this year, and then moving upwards. And then, as Nicola suggested earlier, returning to normal sorts of levels, 2.5% average, 3.5% the year after, is our forecast based on all of those factors.
Lovely, Sarah. Thanks for that. That's very informative. Cheers. Dave, I don't know which you prefer. We've got a question from Peter from Lancet. How can we increase productivity in our industry, and has working to create buildings differently during COVID in healthcare, for instance, taught us anything?
Well, that was me thinking. I was quite pleased I didn't have to answer the last question. Productivity. I think it's well known that the construction sector is one of the poorest performers in terms of productivity in the UK. So that's quite a low starting point that we need to go from. We've seen quite an increase last year and the year before in more adoption of more digital techniques, which is helping us to be smarter at how we deliver projects. So BIM has been around for a long time, and suddenly we're starting to see a lot of our private sector clients adopting the UK BIM framework now, which is a shift. MMC is gathering more traction, and mostly we've seen a notable increase last year during COVID as a way to maintain project progress with less people on site. And currently, and this is certainly applicable to the world I work in, seeing a real leap forward in using AI in project management, intelligent reporting, looking at using algorithms to enhance project predictability. So I think it's a really exciting time for our industry. As I say, we're one of the lower performing sectors at the moment, and there's loads of good stuff going on that are helping us to move up that productivity curve.
I'd just like to add there, Dave, in terms of AI and machine learning, we shouldn't forget that our industry has a huge amount of data it produces throughout the course of a project that we historically have not put to good use. And I think people are starting to realise that now, how important that data is to see trends and analyse them so that we can do things better as we go on.
Thanks, guys. That's really helpful. Now we've got a question here from Sarah, who I'm assuming is an architect, coming from Make. Post COVID, and this will be for you. This will be for you, Sarah, as well. So how do you think our high streets are going to look post COVID? Are we going to see big gaps as anchor tenants have gone, or will empty retail be repurposed?
Well, the clear answer to that is we hope it will all be repurposed, because once business rates return, the local authorities need those rates to deliver their frontline services, and none of us want to see any gaps. But to me, the key is, our high streets, our urban centres should be unique going forward. They will all look different. They shouldn't be informed by that blueprint and that sea of sameness. But really what we need to do is start by recognizing that it's people that make places, not buildings. So we need to have that stakeholder interaction to inject the life and heart back into our urban centres and establish what mix of uses we need to bring. You know, we need to give people a reason to visit our high streets. You know, the pandemic prior to the, between the lockdown, should I say, footfall in our urban centres, our high streets has dropped to 40% of pre-pandemic levels, largely due to confidence, but we need to give people a reason to visit again. And as the High Street Task Force refers to, they always talk about place assurance, livability and sustainability. And undoubtedly with the relaxation in planning rules, we're going to see more living in our urban centres, you know, particularly backed up by the trend away from ownership towards the PRS model, towards the intergenerational living model. But also, you know, it's going to be supplemented with education, medical facilities. But there isn't going to be a standard answer of what it looks like or a mix of uses. It's going to be informed by the local need. And what we're looking to do is create places where, you know, all senses can flourish, places that are economically thriving, and artistically stimulating, and not forgetting, of course, environmentally footprint free. So they will all look different, but we need to listen to what people want rather than doing what we've done previously and imposing something on and unveiling it once it's built.
Thanks, Sarah, that's really helpful. Dave, I've got a question from one of the guys at London Cost Management, that's Matthew. He asked, what sector trends are you seeing coming?
Well, I mean, the report and the polls today kind of cover some of the sector trends that we're all seeing. I can speak from a Gleeds perspective and look at some of our own trends, which might and in the main they align, I think. So if I think about our major growth sectors over from 2019 to 2020, we saw an increase in health, which was probably our biggest growth sector last year. We saw a great increase in our defence portfolio. Rail grew quite considerably, and the public services sector grew. And I guess they are, they're sectors that you would expect to have tried to continue during 2020 with COVID-19 lurking all around us. Looking forward into this year, we saw a quite healthy pipeline in residential last year, and we're seeing that continue into 2021. We're seeing education dip. I know that came up as one of the sectors early on the poll as one that was probably going to be least affected, but actually we've seen education dip, and I think that's mainly in the higher education space with fewer higher education clients around the country spending money at the moment, and maybe the private school sector. We've also seen, again, our public services forecast for 2021 going up significantly. So works for local authorities, central government agencies, again. So a lot of, I guess, public sector money at the moment, with residential being the main thrust of the public sector spend.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I'll stick with you if I may. We've got a question from Claire. Do the panel think more opportunities will be coming via frameworks as opposed to invited tender competitions? And do they think that's a helpful thing?
Yeah, I certainly, I think so. And it's really interesting that we are seeing more of our, again, private sector clients put in place regional frameworks to deliver services. And whereas we've always had a strong track record in the public sector of delivering frameworks, I think that's going to continue. When you look at the recently launched construction playbook, that's long-term procurement is a key theme of that, and the government is trying to encourage building long-term relationships with suppliers. So that does lend itself to frameworks. I think the question that we need to look at is how the frameworks will be run and on what base are they going to be tendered. So the tendering rules are changing. There is more emphasis on social value. There's more emphasis on continued improvement than before, and perhaps a little bit less than the race to the bottom, trying to secure that big client.
Okay, that's great. Now, I just want, we've had lots of questions in this afternoon, far more than we thought, which is great because it shows there's real engagement from you all out there. And I want to thank you for that. You will, we capture all the questions and we've got your details. And so the guys will come back to you and answer the questions so they won't just be left hanging there. But we're kind of running a bit short of time now. And I promised it's the end of the day, the teapot beckons. And I just want to ask James, Dave and Sarah one final question. And I want a really quick answer. It's 1 minute each, if you could, on this one. And that is, based on the survey results, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the next 12 months and why? And a really quick answer, if you could. Sarah.
I'm very optimistic because in my private sector world, I'm seeing the public sector come through to spend. So I've got double the amount of clients, all with money to spend. So what's not to like?
Lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Dave?
I think it's going to be a tough year for margins. I don't think that's going to get any easier this year. So that will cause a few worry beads during the course of the year. But I'm super excited about the digital advancements and the productivity challenge that's been set. And I really do think that this is the year to change the way that we deliver projects from the ground up. I'm super excited about that.
That's lovely. Thank you, Dave. And James, you're the guy, stats guru. Which way do you see it going?
I think our survey result really showed that it's going to be a tough first half of the year, but I am super optimistic about the second half of the year. And actually, we've shown what we're capable of as an industry in adapting. And when the industry comes back fully, all of those skills are going to be put into play. And it will be really interesting to see how those actually benefit us in the long term. And I think we've realized that what technology can do, and we're just starting as an industry on the journey with technology. And you only got to look at other industries to see how quickly it changed their industries. And I think the next 5 years in this industry are going to probably be some of the most interesting in the history of construction.
Oh, well, look, thanks, guys. Look, I'd like to really thank the panel for your help here today. I'd also like to thank Amy Curnow from Gleeds Corporate Comms, who put all this together, and it's no mean feat to get this one. This is our first one, so I hope you're bored with this in terms of our performance levels. This won't be the last, though. We'll be carrying on these surveys regularly, and we'll also be producing more webinars as we go along. But I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I think we've finished almost like 40 seconds early. So thanks very much. Have a lovely evening.